There's a link in the chat for our brochure for this event, which provides biographies for our incredibly illustrious speakers and artists. So you can find that in the chat at the bottom of your screen. These are all recent artworks and they're all donated by the artists. So I want to thank them so very much for this opportunity to discuss their work and share a bit about the Triangle experience. As you may know, this is also a fundraiser, and you can make a donation by going to the link in the chat at the bottom of your screen. Just click the chat button you see there at the bottom. Actually, a lot is already and will be happening in the chat tonight. We're hoping to hear lots of fun comments, which we already are, from alumni and others who are with us tonight. And it's also the chat where you'll find the link to the after party at the end of the event. So take a minute to locate the chat now if you're not familiar. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat button. You can click to read what's posted there. So if you haven't already and you're able to, please do make a donation. This has been a year where we're an international organization. We host artists from all over the world, and we lost actually all of our international partnership funding. No one can travel. And on top of that, funding from foundations and government sources is sharply reduced. So in a word, it's been tough. For those not familiar with our work, Triangle is a residency for visual artists in New York, founded in 1982, which has since grown to dozens of sister programs around the world. We offer a life-changing working environment for committed artists through providing free, spacious, high-ceiling studios in which artists can experiment and create new work. Our residencies create shared community with other artists that last a lifetime. We introduce curators and other experts to the work at crucial times, and we cultivate new and diverse audiences with public programs, such as open studios and many, many other artist talks and events. In this pandemic year, we've redoubled our commitment to our artists. We reopened our studios for 24/7 access as soon as we safely could, and we now, at this moment, have artists working away full steam. And we haven't canceled a single residency over the last year. And you probably know what a feat that is in a year where nearly everything was canceled. So that's why it's urgent to support us now if you can. The artists are ready. In fact, they need space and time and community more than ever. And we need to be ready to meet that need. We've hosted many, many local New York-based artists over the last year. And we've got artists from India, Ghana, Taiwan, and many other countries waiting for their opportunity as soon as it's safe. We've held dozens of hours of studio visits and consultation hours with our artists, connecting them with important curators and critics. We've increased our direct funding to artists. And for those who haven't heard, in 2019, we opened a completely new residency just for our alumni on Governor's Island in the New York Harbor. So all of your donations tonight will go directly to supporting our upcoming residencies and programs this year, which connect our artists to their peers, to mentors, and to adults, families, and children across New York, bringing new audiences to the vital creative work they do. If you're able to donate, I'd encourage you to click the chat for info on how to do so now so you can relax and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you so much for your support. A quick word on the portfolio of prints. We decided to do just a really small limited edition of 30 of these amazing works, which are for sale tonight. The event brochure has additional details about the portfolio, and the link to that is in the chat as well, so you can take a look. I'll just briefly say that the portfolio includes the 6 works by the 5 alumni of Triangle we'll be talking about tonight. They're sold as a set, so you receive all 6, and they're all signed by each artist. Again, it's a small edition of only 30 of these portfolios. The publication price is $3,150, which includes packing and shipping, but everyone attending tonight is entitled to a discounted price of $2,150. So that's a $1,000 discount for those attending this evening. It's a limited edition, so when they're all sold, they're gone. So please send an email directly to me at nova@triangleartsnyc.org if you have any questions, or as soon as you know that you're interested in purchasing, so I can reserve one for you. And my contact information for that is in the chat. Again, all your donations and purchases go directly to running our programs for the coming months, so please contribute if you can. So just some last bits of housekeeping before we start. Again, you can find the links to everything I've mentioned in the chat. Closed captioning is available for this event. You can turn on closed captioning by clicking on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll begin with our conversation with Karen, David, and Christina followed by a few minutes to answer questions from the audience. So again, please post your questions in the chat during the discussion and we'll address those at the end. We'll have a special message from one of our wonderful alumni, some of you may know, John Burkley, and then we'll open up our after party, which will be themed after some of the works we're discussing, for everyone to join in smaller groups to hang out and chat and say hello and reunite with old friends and meet new ones. If you have any questions or technical difficulties, send us a message in the Q&A rather than the chat. So use the Q&A for technical questions, which is also at the bottom of your screen. And the info for how to do that is posted in the chat too. So finally, to our alumni out there, I'm loving all of the comments already. We would love to hear from anyone else. Let us know where you're signing in from, share your memory of Triangle. Were you at a workshop? Where are you now? How did Triangle change your work or you're thinking about art? Post your memories, your reminiscences, your inside jokes, bonus points for anyone here who knows any of the artists that we're discussing tonight, bonus points for any great memories of Karen, and I know that there are many. And yeah, I'm just very happy to welcome you all, and I'll just say thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Karen, Christina, and David.
Thank you, Nova. Hello, David. Hello, Christina. And hello, everybody. I keep seeing old friends in the chat and thinking, the only thing wrong with this is we don't get to actually see anybody in person, but we know they're there and that's a lot. The portfolio has a long history. We've been wanting to do this for a long time. And I think, Christina, you remember when we talked about this a long time ago. David, you were spared that. But we finally brought it off. And we've got, we wanted to have a very diverse group of artists because Triangle was global before global was invented. The original 3 points of the triangle were the US, Canada, and Great Britain. When Anthony Caro founded it, all the artists either knew each other or knew each other's work, and they shared an aesthetic. Well, that very quickly changed. The second year, we already had artists from France and South Africa. And I don't know what you call the figure now. It's certainly not a triangle anymore. It's some kind of multi-pointed thing, maybe like a coronavirus. But we have alumni from every continent except Antarctica. But we do have one alumnus who went to Antarctica on this, the British, what is it, British Antarctic Survey Program, where they send an artist. Simon Faithfull did a video about that. So the portfolio reflects that wide-rangingness of Triangle. And I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to work backwards here. Come on. Technology.
Perfect.
Finally. So the first artist is Hamra Abbas, who lives in Lahore. And we have two images from, this is a two-part invention. So one is a horizontal and one is a vertical. And they're definitely a pair. Nova said these address issues of politics. And maybe that's not immediately apparent, but this certainly is dealing with more than color relationships here. Did you have a chance to read Hamra's statement?
Yes, it was very interesting, and I like this idea that misregistration can be tooled for a kind of aesthetic political gesture. And it's not, for me, it connects to the idea of recognition. That I can't remember who it was who said that all acts of recognition are acts of misrecognition. And I feel like the way politics is sedimented in this work has to do with the way we kind of habitually see things, and the way those habitual ways can be kind of teased apart and recalibrated for a different kind of awareness. And in this case, Blackness as somehow, a consequence of this misrecognition.
And I think the companion piece, which is certainly about messing with our perception, making this both difficult to read and complicated, simply by the misregistration of this.
I love the cadence. I love the cadence of the Black elements in this text. Like it is very hard to read, and the moments where all the colors line up are kind of rare. There's that one little E up on top, and there's a couple little bits down below, and the thing makes a rhythm that is very kind of, what's the word, arrhythmic. And I think somehow that plays into the manifest content in a lively way.
Yeah, it also has of course, this is, these are Arabic letters, but not Arabic letters. These are Roman letters, but we are playing into that tradition of inscriptions within the Islamic world. And often that calligraphy is almost illegible. It's so embellished for to be more special, to be holier. And I think she's playing with that idea too. Because much of Hamra's work starts with very traditional ideas and goes somewhere else.
I was thinking in her work, there was such an interesting relationship, a very overt relationship between, the meaning and the material. And when we were first chatting about this conversation, Karen, the idea of just abstraction in general came up. And that, for me, ended up being the window through which I kind of came into all of these works. That, it's a short conversation, and that was the theme that really attracted me. And I was thinking about how her relationship to abstraction was so different than other relationships. And that, for me, was the way of approaching the works. And it occurred to me in her works, it's an abstraction that seems to come from, obviously we're dealing with recognizable forms, but the impact of the work, the power of the work, and they are so powerful, seemed to me from almost delineating the spaces between the meaning and the material, kind of pulling them apart and exposing, the layers that might be implicit in the representation of something, and something as dense in terms of both meaning and material as a religious image, I think make for an incredibly powerful source point for that kind of teasing apart. And so I was just fascinated in her work. And I'll add quickly as well that we will not have time in this conversation to go into, I think, the artist's larger body of work, but I know we all looked into other things these artists have done. And there is just the most amazing play, I think, in her work between, religious or cultural icons or images, and then how they get translated into the wider culture and what that might mean visually. So I was really, I thought these were very compelling works.
I do
That's
too.
cool. I feel like there's a theme that could be spun from this that applies to all the work we're about to look at. And it has to do with, it sounds a little goofy, like the sociality of color, the sociability of color, the way colors within an artwork relate to each other as if they were having a social relation. And I think in this case, it's a very odd one and an interesting one, because it does sort of speak to the broader context of Blackness within the social realm.
But of course, Hamra is a brown person, not a Black person. A very gorgeous brown person, by the way.
So that's very interesting. So how I mean, I'm assuming that blackness in this case, if it does have a political import, is a kind of a stand-in for people of color.
I
And
think
that
it
would,
probably is. I think it probably is. And it also is this idea of unity in a way, because here we've got the, you know, the process color that is used in traditional printing to make all the other colors. And by the misregistration, you get all the colors. And in that one moment when they all overlap, you get the black.
Mhm.
But she's also, as she says, she's very interested in misperception as well. Yeah.
I wish I
Very,
could remember who said, and I think it's somebody fancy like Jacques Lacan, who said that all acts of recognition are misrecognitions.
no,
And this is true.
sounds like
Very,
him.
it does sound like him.
Right. Well, we could talk about this for much, much longer, and maybe we'll go back, but I think we should move on ahead. Francis Barth, who is one of our American alumni, this wonderful piece, which is very typical of her work in many ways, in that looking at it, you become dislocated spatially. Are we dealing with perspective? Are we dealing with mapping? Are we dealing with an aerial view? It's that relationship to the keeping the viewer literally off balance that I think really animates this work.
Yeah, I was really, I found this a very, very compelling piece, as I do, you know, many of this artist's abstractions. And it feels like her relationship to the two-dimensional world is just so thorough. It's so thought through by this point that I feel like, I mean, obviously a work like this brings questions of scale, mapping to mind. There's the orientation implied by something possibly being more aerial. You can see perspectival lines, or what, you know, what we think of as being perspectival lines, where maybe a shape looks like it's receding. But of course, it's a fully two-dimensional image. And maybe it's a bit, I don't mean to be tongue in cheek about it, but I was thinking, you know, this looks very much like a place one could visit. And, you know, again, it brings me to this idea of expanded views that I think in the last few years, the last maybe couple of decades, there really is this expanded view of how abstraction can work. That's what made these working, what looking at these works made me think of. And I think in this type of abstraction, it's very okay to say that this could be a place you could go into, that you could travel into. I think in this kind of thing, that's a good thing. And it also occurred to me as I was thinking about how to travel through this space, I thought you could do it, but you'd have to be two-dimensional yourself, which sounds a bit silly. But what I'm sort of thinking of is that it really is this very deeply intuitive feeling of what the two-dimensional plane actually can be about, what it accomplishes, how there are different states, how there are different spaces, and how one can really inhabit that space, which is of course what painting is all about, you know, although it can take so many different, you know, forms of doing that. But I really saw this as a very interesting space to kind of inhabit as a viewer.
That's cool. The thing that struck me about it is its warmth. For an image that has a kind of diagrammatic character and a kind of and seems to sort of dwell on architecture, that there's this voice quality to it that feels intimate and close. And in a way, I kind of I chuckle at it, because I think to me I think of a building dancing with itself.
Well,
that there's a kind of animate, you know, quality, but it's a single thing kind of, but it's breaking apart and doing some dance moves.
well, Frances is a very serious tango dancer, so maybe that's entering into it as well. She also says that she tells herself stories when she makes images. So I think she is wandering around in this space in the way that Christina says she feels she's doing. But I think you've made a very important point about abstraction these days, Christina. It's a much more open-ended inclusive approach to making art than it was 20 years ago, I think. And work, some of the work that interests me the most is work that kind of refuses to settle down, that it has an elusive quality. You can read it in a number of ways, like that work of yours behind you on the wall, David, which can be read as something anthropomorphic. It can, at this distance, it means something else. I suspect if I got up close to it, I would be seeing very small elements that are flipping it into something else. And Francis's work does that for me as well.
I love what's going on in the top there, where there's the those streaky brown gestures that seem like they could be weather, or they could be you know, of the sort of surface quality of an object, but the way the gray underneath it kind of nudges up into it. I feel like foreground and background kind of jockey with each other to render the space very very dynamic. And that's another kind of level of dance that happens inside.
Well, in terms of that building analogy, you can also read that wonderful streaky stuff as emanating from that columnar thing on the right.
That's awesome, like a thought bubble.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just love the way my perceptions keep getting messed around with. The more I move around in this.
Now, do you guys know who said? I know this is one of these famous quips that writing about art is like dancing about architecture. And I think it was kind of a put down on art criticism. I think dancing about architecture is a pretty great way to address it.
I think that's a great title. I think Francis ought to appropriate it for a body of work.
But who said that?
I wish I knew.
It's going to come up in the chat for sure.
It's going to come, somebody in the chat is going to know. It's very familiar.
Yeah.
I hope somebody knows it.
It's not quite as fierce as Barnett Newman's phrase that art criticism is to artists as ornithology is to the birds.
Actually, he said art history, I think.
Oh.
I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Which is, that's not so polite either. But, let's look at another one. This is another American alumna, Ingrid Calame, and whose work often involves, if not mapping, literally taking images from the streetscape, from accidental events in the street. And I think Ingrid is here. And if she is, it would be wonderful if she would join us and tell us something about her experience at Triangle. Ingrid was at the World Trade Center in one of the sessions that we had there. And are you here?
I think I might have seen in the chat that we're not seeing her necessarily.
I haven't looked in the chat. I'm sorry. I can't look in the chat and screen share. Well, that's too bad. But we do have a very beautiful print and very, very luminous. Whether this has its origins in some mess in the street, I don't know. But she certainly transformed it in every way. And yet another radically different approach to abstraction.
Yeah, I think there's something very pungent about this. There's and I think it partially has to do with the blackness out of which colors emerge. But I trust that somehow there's an indexical feature that these are not just cooked up or in the kitchen of her studio, but that there's some research. She's gone out and she's either done a rubbing or a tracing, and that the kind of compositing of those various indexical behaviors results in this thing, which is kind of this weird space age bloom.
I suspect you're right, David. I mean, partly because that's the way she works, And also, because the more time you spend looking at this, the more you find these repetitive sort of textural things that look as though they had their origins in a rubbing of some kind. Unidentifiable, but present. And they repeat in different colors. So there may be that element in there. Pungent's a perfect word. I mean, these are kind of mouth puckering colors. Yeah, citrus.
I thought her whole project was really quite remarkable. The more, you know, I looked into her work, this idea of trying to capture the world on a one-to-one scale, I think is just, that really got me thinking about how much, you know, scale in the practical sense is, for the most part, invented so that we can conceive of the world when we cannot see it with the naked eye or in one frame of vision, like either looking at a huge territory of space, you know, you have a map for that and you have a scale for that. Or if you're, say, looking at something very, very small, like a diagram of a cell or something, you know, that's something that could not be seen with the naked eye. So you've got, you know, questions of scale in those two cases. But this idea of having the exact immediate, you know, one-to-one, I thought was just really very poetic. And even, you know, a little like fighting the windmills, as I think she herself says, there's an impossibility to what she's doing. So there's this very poetic gesture, I think, of, you know, taking the world frame by frame. The other thought that her work, you know, brought to mind was when we were talking about how the artists in this collection might be dealing with current events or the world. They all seem to have this quality of being, trying to come to grips with something, trying to get a handle on things. And I was thinking the type of work, the type of abstraction was inquisitive and incisive in nature. And in her case, the inquisitiveness takes her right up against the surface of the world, literally the concrete, the, you know, the detritus, whatever you're talking about. I think it's a really remarkable project. And I think it would be very interesting to have one of her works to be looking at and to be thinking about.
Because part of it is that the randomness, the grit of the world gets translated into these incredibly lush and beautiful things that are yes, they're portraits of something one-on-one, but turned into another language. That issue of scale, it made me think about you know, Cubist still life, where the most evocative and powerful ones are the ones where those fragmented wine glasses are the size of actual wine glasses, and you mentally measure them against what you know about actual wine glasses. And that becomes part of the importance of the restructuring.
That's very interesting.
I think it would be interesting to think about each of these artists in relationship to the digital or the kind of digital print. And I think this one, Ingrid's piece, is plays with that to some extent. And I'm thinking about the itinerary of the image as it travels from its origin as a thing in the world to a rubbing, or however she indexes it, into the studio as an artwork, and then to a photograph of that, which then finds a digital translation, and then finally on this page. I feel like that's somehow part of the work, that itinerary.
I'm sure you're right. And of course, you know, these works were made for the project. So the artists knew that they were going to be translated into archival digital prints.
And I guess the last leg of that route is on the screen right now. So it has this, you know.
And they look even better in person. Well, I'm sorry Ingrid isn't here, but we do have this beautiful work. And Jitish Kallat, who anyone in Chicago would know, because he had this light installation on the staircase of the Art Institute, which is a quotation of a speech from Gandhi translated into colored lights. Very, very beautiful. This is, I guess, the obverse of everything we've been looking at. you know, black and white, very tight, very meticulous. It's from a series he calls Emergence. You know, we can play with that as we will.
It
But
so reminds me of certain images from the 18th century, and I'm thinking of Athanasius Kircher or Robert Flood. I don't know if you know these people, but they were kind of scientist polymaths, each of them, especially Kircher, who did drawings, illustrations, diagrams of like the origin of the world, or cosmic spaces, or even kind of geologic phenomena, and this image has a lot of the qualities of those. And I love that somehow this kind of automatism, or however the image came to be, is kind of framed within a kind of analytic, diagrammatic context. Like all the bits around the outside suggest that this is something that's has a kind of information feature, and yet it's kind of madly imaginative at the same time.
it seems incredibly specific and impossible at the same time. And then just when you get involved in the illusionism of, that I get captured by the randomness, the spills and the I asked Jitish what the writing was, and he said it can't be read. So it's you know, it's this, again, playing with this idea that this is something very particular and it exists, but no, it doesn't.
Yeah. I think this was the work that made me think of the phrase, you know, kind of coming to terms with trying to get a grip on some kind of content that is inherently very slippery. And in his own quote, I think, in some of his own writing, he refers to the idea of inherent geometry, which is, you know, really an endlessly fascinating subject. You know, it's certainly a very old idea that, you know, a circle precedes any kind of material iteration of a circle we can get, you know, that kind of, you know, it's an old idea. But it remains fascinating, I think, to actually put it into practice. And this idea, I think he says this might refer to a spurt of air, that perhaps he's having some material and he's, having a concentration of air focused on it. And of course, we see the concentric rings happening, or ring-like forms coming, that are sort of a measurement of intensity. And this idea of measuring, intensity of circles, the circle that naturally forms when, say, air would hit something. All of these ideas, I think, are just, so interesting to try to get a grip on, but of course one never quite can, because they're not material ideas. Even, as much as you try to draw them, they'll always be literally an abstraction of an idea. And I think that's a very compelling part of his work. I'll just toss out there too, this much more general idea, but I just wanted to pop it in there, that the one thing that looking at these works really did for me as well was I found myself really questioning, especially in light of this past year, where one decides something is a real and a given, and that something else is a construct. For example, countries, they're very real when it comes to where you can travel, as we were learning this past year with the pandemic, but they, of course, constructs as well. And I found a lot of the works, whether it was through mapping or through sort of this macro, micro macro treatment of scale, they all had me thinking about where one draws the line of what's the given and what's the interpretation of the given. So that's just a thought to do with his work as well.
Well, it seems particularly relevant to this because we have this war going on between this very voluptuous, carefully made, irregular, organic kind of thing, and yet it's disciplined by those ruled lines and the grid. And then we have the splash, which comes from the making. So it's working on a lot of different levels, a lot of different languages of reference, in a way that seems to me to make a lot of sense in relation to what you just said.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought you were going to go down the route of chaos or complexity theory, and talk about a kind of fractal possibility in these kind of forms. And for some reason, it seems like a sort of almost a kind of antiquarian representation of the Big Bang. And the
Yeah.
Big Bang happens, in the first couple microseconds. Matter comes into being, and time is suddenly begins, whatever it is. But that it has a kind of a slightly scientific / mystical character.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
yet
part of
it also feels very material.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fascinating piece.
Mm.
And the last work is by Larry Poons, and is very, very related to his current paintings, which for about the last 10 years, he's been painting by hand. He said that he never thought he could draw, which is why those early dot paintings are all based on plotting and systems and allusions to musical scores. And then he co-opted gravity to do his drawing for him with the throne paintings. And lo and behold, he discovered he could do it by hand. But the color is just as complex as it was in any of the earlier work. And I mean, this is a kind of, for me, a kind of, classical process-based, exuberant image with one thing is born out of another thing, and we mentally recapitulate it's happening as it's making as we look at it with this radiant color.
I think I'm an irrepressible reader into that. I tend to kind of see things, and in this one, it feels like it's a landscape as a noisy party.
That sounds like Larry. You have to remember, this is someone who drives a 50s Porsche at very high speed through the Catskills, and also still races his motorcycle and keeps winning in his age category, although I'm not sure there is anyone else in his age category at this point. But that kind of speed and fragmentation of the landscape, I think you're absolutely right.
David, you mentioned the last work we were looking at, the idea of chaos, and that was a little note I have in relation to this. I do feel there's this wonderful fighting against chaos in Poons' work. It's a different kind of thing, but it just made me think of it. I think there really is this lovely, that's a wrong word for it, but there really does feel in Poons' work like there's something at stake. And I think that's a kind of, a tradition of abstraction that is really remains very, very powerful. It's form versus formlessness. And what I love in this particular piece are the little lines he's done with, I think, Karen, is that like a ballpoint pen maybe? Or
Could be.
And I think that for me was very telling, because it's not, these are not about making pretty pictures, but there's, pushing it to the brink, where I think there's, so much color and so much going on, and then really teasing the form out of that. And I really do think his works just are absolutely on the edge of, being something or nothing. And they just manage to, retrieve that bit of formlessness. And they feel very brave that way. And I really I appreciate that very much in this work. There's that incisiveness, even amidst the kind of chaos. I think
I think the element of risk is very, very important, because as with the throw paintings, these are in a sense about letting things happen and responding instantly as they happen, and then at various scales of mark. But what I think is very striking about the work is the sense of light, the sense of radiance coming through here, which is, I think, very important to him. It's
yeah, I feel that too, and I like sort of thinking about each of these marks as a single phrase, like like a musical phrase, or maybe like a like a script, like writing. but that I'm pretty sure that this was made by one mark after the other.
I'm sure you're right.
So that the kind of cacophony, let's say, of all of these phrases
Mhm.
kind of piling onto each other, one after the other, makes a kind of energy that feels very human and alive.
And of course, that immediately reminds us that Poons was a serious musician before he started painting.
Oh,
He was at the Boston Conservatory and decided he was never going to be as great as Beethoven, so he started making art instead.
mm.
He still
It's
wants
so
to be as
weird.
great as Beethoven, but on paper.
I was teased by my cousin. He toasted me at the wedding. He knows nothing about art, and he said that maybe I'm competitive and I hate to lose, and so I entered a profession in which I could make up my own rules and then win at that. Anyway, it sounds like Larry Poons did.
Yeah, that's a very good observation.
Yeah.
Very applicable. So we've got, as you know, if you've been paying attention to the dates, you can see we've got someone who was there right the second year, and then one of our international workshops when the city of Barcelona invited us to come and combined us with Catalan and Spanish artists. Jitish was in Dumbo. The first year that we had the workshop there after the World Trade Center was no longer an option. And David Walentis and Two Trees took pity on us and gave us space, which they've been giving us ever since, and for which we are profoundly grateful. Ingrid, who was also in the World Trade Center, the second year that we were there, we were planning another workshop. That didn't happen, as you can imagine. Francis, who was still in our original home in upstate New York at Pine Plains, New York, which you can miss if your stoplight is green instead of red. But we had a wonderful place there that unfortunately no longer was available to us, a former dairy farm. And Hamra, who was at the workshop in Dumbo, and then also the residency. So we spanned the whole evolution of Triangle, with the exception of 1 year when we were at a former ski resort in Monroe, New York. So I think what we will do now is stop screen sharing and go back to gallery view. And we have a video of the work of the portfolio, which Nova will show us, that gives you a sense of the scale of the work, which you didn't get from what we were just doing.
So thank you so much, David, Christina, and Karen. And hopefully the video gives you a sense of what these look like in real life, their actual scale and their presence. The information, again, about the portfolio itself, the whole set of works, is in the chat. We've been posting it repeatedly. It's a big chunk of text that you'll see in the midst of all the great comments from the audience. And again, just write directly to me if you have any questions about it. But I've been watching the chat and there are some great questions coming in. So David, Christina, and Karen, can you come back on and unmute and we can discuss?
Here we are.
Well, the first one, if I'm honest, is actually a question from me, which is just to ask if you wouldn't mind talking about the process of making a work that is for a print like these are. What are some of the things that artists think about in terms of this particular format?
David,
Well, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, David, that might be a good one for you.
Whenever I have the opportunity to make prints, I definitely try to think of something that's happening in the studio that could be augmented by the experience, the process of making the print, because it's always a little bit of an adventure that I learn something from. And I try also to find an image that kind of loosely represents something at the center of my kind of diverse practice, because it's something that, you know, in its multiple form kind of goes out and has a little bit of a what's the word, it's not populist, but it's a little in the direction of something affordable and multiple. And so I wanted to kind of, you know, stand for what I do in some kind of ways. But, you know, every print is a different adventure. And I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my short version.
I think that's so relevant to the portfolio. Just a very quick comment that it really felt when I was looking at these pieces and then researching more about the artists that they really do offer in a kind of window to the work. So when you're saying you're thinking that on some level it has to be central, I think that's very much part of this collection, which I think makes it quite special that way.
I think all of the artists were very aware of that. You know, they have deep connections with Triangle, and they also, knowing that this is an international audience, they wanted to be represented by something that said who they were. And then there are other practical considerations, like, you know, what something that's graphic enough to reproduce. You know, although now with archival digital printing, there are color issues that are just amazing. That, you know, I don't think we could have done the Ingrid Calame print with any other process and had that kind of radiance. And then the Poons print, which is so vibrant as well. So it was, they were all very thoughtful in terms of what they sent us, and we're very grateful.
And what about the titles for the works? This is a question from Alan Williams. He was curious about the titles and whether they would give, you know, information or indications about meaning for the viewer.
You know, the artists came up with their own titles. I think isn't the Poons called Paw Up?
I wondered about that one. Karen, do you have any insight into that?
At one point, Larry had 32 cats.
There you go.
They no longer have 32 cats. I think it's now 6. At one point, when there were multiple cats, many of them were missing legs or tails, so it didn't. They were adopted and given wonderful lives, so it didn't add up to quite as many cats as 32. But Larry has often said that he is not an art lover; he's a cat lover. He has seen lots of art he's not the least bit interested in, but he's never seen a cat that he didn't find interesting. And Larry's wife, the painter Paula de Lucia, we call the cat whisperer, because she is extraordinary in rescuing feral animals and domesticating them and keeping terminally ill cats comfortable and alive for years. So cats are a big part of their lives.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, hilarious. And for those who didn't catch it, the title is Paw Up, which I also have been wondering about, and that's even more fantastic answer than I would have anticipated.
Now, it may have a completely different explanation, but that
I mean, I just connected it to the artist hand, and that piece by him is so.
Mhm.
His hand is so evident in it that
Yeah.
whatever his identification with cats would be. And I like thinking of paws as kind of, these slightly clumsy, but maybe also aggressive extensions.
That's probably all in there too.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some technical questions about the portfolio in the chat, and probably the easiest way to get those answered if you're curious about the nitty gritty is there's that link in the chat to the brochure, and you should be able to click on that, and that will give you more information about the portfolio and the paper and those sorts of things. But this question gets like right into the heart of things. It's a question from Hannah Yukon, and Karen, the question is, what does Karen mean when she speaks about the impossible? And I believe that was something you said in reference to Jitish.
Only that, even though nothing very arcane, I meant that here is an image which looks as though it's something that must exist, something very specific, either some biological phenomenon or some cosmic event, and yet we know it doesn't exist.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Please.
Because I like what you said, and it sort of, I think it was bouncing off something I said about the way certain artworks can hold kind of paradoxical or conflicting aspirations or qualities within themselves. And maybe you could call that dialectical, but to me, the best artworks are the ones that are a little bit at war with themselves, that they might even be arguing, in that sense, are impossible.
Yeah.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. I wish I'd said that.
You said it.
This is a comment that I thought was interesting from Sean Shepard. The Larry Poons print is a great example of how color influences thought. That blue and the way it's handled really makes me think of water or sky. This places the viewer in two places at once and also nowhere at the same time. And I feel like that sense of place and a kind of multiplicity of place is something that has been a sort of thread of this conversation.
That's a great observation. And it also relates to what we were saying about Hamra's piece, because she talks about how position and dislocation can change the way you see things. And here, the blue is not in a position that you would associate with sky, and yet we have that association in the Poons.
And Sandy Sloan weighs in. When we moved to NYC in 1985, Larry and Paula took care of our cat, Alex, for a few weeks while we tried to settle in. So you can decide whether that's art related or not, but it sounds like for Larry, maybe.
Alex was a great cat. I remember him well.
So Karen, was it true that Triangle in its first couple of years was very much sort of acrylic paint driven? I kind of, for some reason, have this kind of memory of, I was a very young artist at the time and thinking, oh yeah, the Triangle, that's where all the lyrical abstraction pour painters
well, they weren't all lyrical, but they were pretty much all abstract painters. They were all fascinated by what you could do with acrylic. And one of the reasons that they were doing it is because the Golden's paint people would come up and give us paint. And no one in their right mind was going to say, no, thank you, I'd rather go and buy some oil paint. So there was a lot of experimentation. That was also, the early 80s was when acrylic was really developing all kinds of additives, and it was no longer the flat matte commercial paint that it had been. So people were very, very interested in that. And there was a lot of collaboration. The studios were separate but open, so everyone could, in a cattle barn. And everyone could see what everyone was doing, and they'd come over and say, here, try this. But we also, at a certain point, we realized that we did not want to become an academy. And as the art world was changing and people were moving in different directions, we felt that we had to respond to that. And we have. Golden still occasionally gives us paint.
And in fact, Golden has its own residency now.
Yes, it
where
does.
people can go to wherever it's the factory.
No, they have very luxurious living quarters, and their studios are also in a barn. But the best part of it is that apparently, I have a couple of former students who did that residency. They give you a 3-level cart. They send you into the paint room, and they say, take what you want. And they not only have the most state-of-the-art acrylic in the world, but they took over Williamsburg paint after Karl Plansky died. So they have very, very high level oil paint. And they say they want to do for oil paint what they've done for acrylic. And they also have some incredible new kind of watercolor that is far more intense than anything else, because they always work for conservators who are always looking for water-soluble, non-invasive, reversive materials. And they developed this new medium for watercolor, which holds much more pigment than the normal kind. So it's the student who was there, a former student who was there, said it was like dying and going to heaven.
There's a question that's come in from Jill Nathanson. She's asking, was Hamra Abbas's triangle participation her first trip to the US? Was she the first participant from Pakistan? Karen, I'm not sure if you would remember that.
She was the first participant for Pakistan. We had to do unbelievable things to get her a visa. I ended up calling someone in the diplomatic corps whom I had met when I was in Latvia for a Rothko event. And we finally got her in. But I think it was her first trip. She then later lived in Boston for a while because her husband was doing postgraduate work at Harvard. And then they went back to Lahore, where they are now.
Yeah. Well, that gives you a little bit of a sense of the lengths that Triangle has gone to be as international as it has been for such a long time. And particularly, Karen, I'm just impressed at how well you remember those details. I mean, this is something that many people—
Well, I remember this detail because I was the one who was making the phone call.
Yeah, and that's very Triangle too. Those of us who know, those of you who know us know that it's quite a skin of the
very hands-on. Very hands-on.
And very heartfelt operation. And I think that's a great place to close. And thank you so much, David, Christina, and Karen. And for those of you who, if you can't find or you can't download the brochure where the link is in the chat, just post a message in the Q&A and we can help you out. We can get that to you if you'd like that as a PDF. If you are just interested to see the works. It might be easier to zoom in, which I know is sometimes difficult on Zoom. So if you're interested in that, just let us know. Yeah, and thank you so much to Karen Wilkin, David Humphrey, and Christina Key for that wonderful conversation. All of our speakers, and again, all of the artists have donated their time and their work this evening, and we're really grateful. And I now want to introduce John Burkley, who's a Triangle alum and a wonderful artist who's participated in many of our workshops over the years. John is also a board member and is now this summer spearheading a series of fantastic programs on Governor's Island. So let's hear now from John.
Hi, I'm John Buickley, and I'm an artist. I also happen to serve on the board of the Triangle Artists Association, and I've been doing it for well over a decade. And people will often ask me why I'm doing this. And the simple reason is having been welcomed into an incredible community of artists at the workshop I went to in 1993, the Triangle Workshop. I have just been very fortunate to be a part of an amazing community of artists. And when I was asked to serve on the board, which came through just helping set up different programs for the organization, I really couldn't turn down that request simply because I needed to put back into this community as much as I could, because it's benefited me so much, and it's benefited so many of my fellow artists. And it's just an incredible community of artists, and the professional and personal relationships that have flourished through this program are really incalculable. And I believe that this is really one of the greatest programs there is for artists in this period of time, especially where the focus is really on developing those interpersonal relationships and conversations that are so necessary for artists to thrive in these days. And so if you're looking to encourage and support artists, this is the organization to do that with. And my small part, it has been to just take part with my fellow board members in trying to keep this organization going. And if you want to be involved, and if you have the financial capacity, your giving will be extremely well spent here at Triangle, because you are benefiting so many artists and so many conversations between artists. And so you will not find a better organization to support in the art world than this one. So thank you, and I do hope you'll consider. I hope you've enjoyed the We Know What We Like presentation, and do keep an eye on Triangle.
Thank you, John. It's really wonderful to hear what Triangle has meant to you. And there are many, many stories like that in relation to Triangle. We're coming up on our 40th year. And so there are a lot of artists who I think feel similarly. We're about to share the link to the evening's after party, which will be held in a smaller set of Zoom rooms, so you can have a chance to actually meet and talk and see each other. I just want to echo some of what John said. All of your donations tonight will go directly to supporting our residencies and programs over the next few months. This is the last moment we'll ask you tonight, so please do make a donation or send me an email for more information or to reserve your print if you haven't already. And again, you can find all of that info to do that in the chat. So we're really excited about the after party tonight. When you click the link we're about to post in the chat, you'll be able to choose which room you want to join. The rooms are named for themes or ideas from the artworks and the artists themselves. And each room will be hosted by a Triangle board member, several of whom are artists themselves. So just go where your curiosity takes you and join any room that piques your interest. The after party rooms are, and you'll see this again when you click the link, but just to list them off for you, the after party rooms are Natural Geometry Room, which is named for Jitish Kallat, the Failed Painting Room, which is named for Larry Poons, the Radical Abstraction Room, which is named for Francis Barth, the Color as Desire Room, which is named for Hamra Abbas, and the Map of the World Room, which is named for Ingrid Calame. So in just a moment, we'll add that link to the after party rooms in the chat for you to click on. I want to mention that Triangle is currently participating in virtual open studios through Art in Dumbo, which is a great organization that supports the arts across our Brooklyn neighborhood. We are highlighting our current artists in residence who are with us till the end of May. So this is kind of the last chance to catch them. And they include painter Rebecca Levitan, multidisciplinary artist Natalia Nakazawa, sculptor and installation artist Ilana Harris-Babu, and performance and interdisciplinary artist Jody Linky Chow. We've done some great interviews with each of them that are available on the Art in Dumbo site and delve into things like how they got started as artists, their most recent projects, the techniques and the forms that they use, and their advice for young artists who are just starting out. So that program will be up until May 23rd, and again, it's virtual. Hopefully we're moving out of the virtual phase here in New York, but this Open Studios is on the Art in Dumbo website. So you can go to our website for more information about that. So I think our after party is set up. So we'll share the link in the chat now, but please note that the moment you click the link, you'll be redirected to the after party and automatically exited from this event. It may take a couple of minutes for the link to bring you there since many people will be joining at once. So thanks for your patience. And again,